Hello everyone, Ryan here. So I recently reread Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and this was just my second time rereading it. First time I read it, I will admit there's a lot of stuff in it that just went right over my head. I didn't understand a lot of it. But since then, I've read several other books on Buddhism, spirituality, other things having to do with Zen-like meditative states. And so therefore, after rereading it this time around, I was actually able to get through it a lot quicker and also understand a little better some of the language used throughout and also terminology, stuff like that. Of course, Siddhartha is more philosophical than anything else, even though there is a lot of reference to different spiritual practices, meditations, prayers, chanting, a lot of other stuff to do with Buddhism. It is definitely much more philosophical, and of course, do not feel like, well, I want to make sure that people know that you don't have to be of any one faith or any particular religious background in order to appreciate this book, because I do believe everybody should read this at least once in their lifetime, at least once. Of course, it is loosely based on the actual life story of the Buddha. Exactly how loosely, I can't really say. But I do know that it's loosely based off of that. I mean, because it is fiction. I guess you could say it's somewhat sparingly historical fiction, but really not entirely. Of course, Siddhartha, the character, the main protagonist, Siddhartha, is well-to-do, comes from a well-to-do family, and one day he decides to leave his family for a much more contemplative life, and then of course, in other words, he decides to pursue the path of taking the necessary steps towards becoming a monk. And of course, luckily he's joined by his best friend Govinda, and they both set out on this quest, I guess you could say, to become monks, or if you want to say holy men, ascetics. So along with his friend Govinda, they set out to take necessary steps. And eventually along the way, Siddhartha tires of the rituals. He tires of doing the same meditations and prayers and chanting. And because to him, he eventually feels like he's no closer to any state of enlightenment than he was at the beginning. So he pretty much kind of gives it up and then decides to pursue a life of the flesh. In other words, whereas before he was trying to transcend all of the basic human desires that most human beings tend to experience, he stopped trying to transcend all that, and then just gave in to all these desires. Of course, the typical ones, like greed, I guess you could say, greed, gluttony, a lot of sexual desires, and he actually ends up becoming a successful businessman, merchant, and ends up wearing the finest clothes, having the best wine to drink, best food to eat, and then, of course, after some time, he tires of this and decides to give it up and goes back to a life of asceticism, a life of something resembling monkhood, but not quite, because of the fact that he still doesn't believe in pursuing one path, adhering to one particular spiritual practice or lifestyle. And then, of course, along the way, he comes across this ferryman which is this guy who helps people get across a river in a boat. And even though this ferryman clearly has no formal education, and he really doesn't know, he knows next to nothing about various spiritual practices that any monk has to go through, he still seems very wise. I mean, in the eyes of Siddhartha, this ferryman seems much wiser than him, and pretty much the wisest man that he's ever met. Mostly because this ferryman has spent a good portion of his life just paying attention to what the river tells him. Kind of, and by tell him, I mean, he spent a good portion of his life just realizing that life and existence itself tends to be much like a river. It's just constantly flowing. A river can, of course, flow out in many different directions all at once. And because of that, there's really no way that anyone can control the way a river flows. Just like when it comes to life or reality, none of us can really control, what happens from one day to the next. Most of the time, we just end up having to go with the flow. Ultimately, we end up having to accept all of the chaos, all of the unpredictability that comes with life and existence and reality. And of course, I do realize that may seem like very, very philosophical, like extremely philosophical to a lot of people. And also a hard thing to just even begin to grasp, the fact that, essentially, the main protagonist in the story, Siddhartha, he eventually does come to the realization that, good and evil cannot exist without each other. In other words, you can't have good without evil. You can't have evil without good. Same goes for, like, you say, creation and destruction and many other opposites, because that's what our reality is, for the most part, all about. Even though most of us don't see it that way, most of us try to deny that, most of us, see an evil act being done, or we're aware of an evil person or a group of evil people, and for the most part we stay away from that, or we choose to stay away from evil things, evil people, and at the same time choose to believe that there is no hope of salvation, no hope of changing evil into good, when actually that's not the case. In other words, Siddhartha realizes that because of the fact that good cannot exist without evil, evil cannot exist without good, what that means to him is that even the most evil person, like if you can think of like the most evil person that you've ever met in your entire life, or that you know of, even that person carries within them the possibility for the greatest good, the possibility to, the possibility for great change, the possibility at any given moment. Now, granted, of course, obviously that doesn't mean that that person's going to actually do anything good, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we have the right to just automatically write off that person as just being nothing but evil, and absolutely nothing can be done to help him or whatnot. But then also too, at the same time, none of us really has the right to tell that person how to live their own life, just like nobody really has a right to tell each of us how to live our lives. essentially, I don't know how else to sum it up other than the fact that Siddhartha eventually realizes that we've all got to accept the fact that things are constantly changing. Within reality, things are always changing. There is no state of permanence, which is also happens to be something that one of the things that Buddhism is constantly, well, as far as I know, one of the things that the Buddha constantly aware of and made sure that other people were aware of, or tried to explain to them in the hopes that they would become aware of the fact that all things are impermanence. There is no permanence. Everything is constantly changing, right down to the very microscopic level, even smaller than that. And even in the larger collective, there is no permanence. Everything is constantly changing, evolving, growing, learning, creating, destroying, rebuilding, destroying again, creating more. And it's just a constant cycle, a continuous cycle. So, I mean, obviously, you can tell that I do really like this book, Siddhartha. Obviously, I do give it 5 out of 5 stars. I don't want to ramble on and on and on about this. Also, too, I don't want to give away too much of the story because, especially if I haven't read it, I don't want to spoil anything. But I will say, yes, it is worth a read. I do believe everybody should read it at least once in their lifetime, at least once. Really have nothing to lose by reading it. Maybe some might say nothing to gain either, but maybe gain a lot of philosophical insight, but then ultimately have to abandon that philosophical insight. I hope it doesn't sound too spacey or far out there. But if it does, hey, that's understandable. So yeah, 5 out of 5 stars for Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Do read it. I encourage everybody to read it. Again, yes, read it. That'll do it for this review. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff if you feel up to it. As always, till next time, keep it real, keep on rocking, and peace.